all the fun things. So let's establish and get this right. I can't tell you how many times I have to preview an agreement of sale, and it is so poorly put together. The importance, there is a reason for all these lines, and realtors are very lazy. Shame on you. There is purpose for these lines. These lines are here so people can find people. If you get run over by a reindeer, your manager and or broker is responsible to pick up the ball and run with it. It's very difficult to do that if we can't find the material needed. Now, I'm not just talking out of the top of my head here. This actually happened about 4 years ago this summer. A realtor with Keller Williams Center City passed away. And it was an absolute nightmare due to the fact we could not get into his email. We could not get into the phone for text. The only thing we had to rely on was dot loop, and in the dot loop was very poorly done. And even when we found an agreement of sale, it was not filled out. We had no emails, no phone numbers, no addresses to find somebody. So this is extremely important that this is filled out correctly. So if we start at the top left, the question is, who is the buyer or the buyers? And everyone who is involved in the transaction needs to be on this. We also need a mailing address. Pick somebody's address. It needs to be on here. Please stop creating agreement of sales without addresses. If you look to the right, we have a seller or sellers, and we need a mailing address. We management run into problems on a daily basis when an LLC is selling a property and or buying a property. Here's the problems. One is, how do we identify the LLC if communication is needed? You're the agent representing the LLC, either on the buy side or sell side. You get run over by a reindeer. How do we figure out who the hell these people are? As a buyer agent and or selling agent, if you are working with individuals who are purchasing as an LLC, you need what is called the Articles of Corporation. That question often comes down the line by the title company. The title company has to confirm whoever signed this paperwork has the right to sell it, to buy it through the LLC. They have to be a member of the LLC, and depending on how it was structured, only certain people may or may not be able to sign in purchasing or selling of property. If it would be very helpful and advantageous for you as the agent working with the LLC to obtain the Articles of Corporation ahead of time, confirming that the signature that is on that piece of paper is legitimately legal to buy or sell real estate. It will save all of us a lot of aggravation, including yourselves. When a transaction falls apart and the buyer is asking for their deposit monies back, and it's an LLC, and we get a termination and return of deposit monies in the accounting department with Joe Bag of Donuts LLC, we have no idea who is signing that, who has the right to do that. Then we have to start the process all over. Send us the Article of Corporation. We need to confirm that somebody can do this. And then we have to have it re-signed by whomever has the permission to do this. So please, let's learn something and be proactive here on the LLC side of transactions. Not just hurry up and sign it, not just hurry up, let's initial and sign it. No, you have to do your homework. My goal here is to make you a better agent, not just somebody to fill in blanks. You need to understand why we're filling in the blanks, okay? So on the sell side, we also need a mailing address for this seller. What if this is an investment property for the seller and it is not the same address as the property being sold? We need to be able to reach people. Make sure both these addresses are filled in. Now, let's talk about the property that we're going to sell. The next horizontal block is identified by property, and it says address, including postal city, 123 Main Street in Philadelphia, PA, with the zip code. The zip code was added about 3 or 4 upgrades in the past. So with that said, you must add zip codes. The municipality. If you are in the city of Philadelphia, you want to add municipality, city of Philadelphia. Otherwise, if you're in the suburbs, you accidentally got out there and you listed or buying or selling or whatever you're doing, you need to go to the tax records, and the tax records are going to help you in the burbs. It will list under public records what the municipality is, so there's no mistake here, okay? That's how you're going to fill in municipality. And the county, it will identify in the public tax records, or excuse me, the public records, what the county is. And the school district, that is priceless. Individuals will buy in the suburbs according to the school district that they want to live in. So it is really important that you identify the school district and you get that correct. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we need a tax ID number. Tax ID numbers come from public records. That is how the township, municipality, or city identifies the property, not so much by address. It's this number that has to go in here. Now, FYI, if you are filling this out for a property in Philadelphia, the county is of Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the only city in the United States that is its own county, the only one. So the municipality is the city of Philadelphia, and the county is also that of Philadelphia. Now, it has identification by parcel, lot, block, deed. No. All you need is tax ID, okay? Now, as we scroll down, you'll see a very narrow rectangular box, which says, buyer's relationship with a PA licensed broker. Oh, okay. So now we're going to identify who the professional is for the buyer. But there is a tiny little box on the left-hand side. And it says, no business relationship. Buyer is not represented by a broker. Who might that buyer be that chooses to check off that box that the buyer is not being represented by a broker? Does anyone here have any ideas who that buyer could be that would check off that box?
An agent?
Correct. An agent is one of them. Good. Who else? Let's think of other professionals. Who else might be so fabulous that they don't need a real estate agent? How about an attorney? Right? An attorney. An attorney may make a decision that they don't want representation from a real estate agent. And the third person, and I want you guys to be making notes on this. So I don't know if you printed it out, you can handwrite notes, you're taking notes somewhere else. But the third one is someone who, Joe Public, who has decided that they are that fabulous that they do not need representation. So there is 3 scenarios that would fall into play when that little tiny box is filled out. An attorney, a real estate agent themselves representing themselves on a purchase, or someone representing themselves because they're that fabulous. Okay. Now, when that is not checked off, and in most cases it's not, because the public realizes this is way over their pay grade and they're going to need help, who is going to be representing that buyer? So we start on the left. This next rectangle box is divided, and we start on the left-hand side and want to know who the broker or the company is. And the company for us is Keller Williams. Please spell it out. Stop being lazy and just putting a capital K and a W. Keller Williams, Philadelphia. Our company number, write this down, is R as in Ralph, B as in boy, 068858. R as in Ralph, B as in boy, 068858. What is our address? Our address is 1619 Walnut Street. That is our main company address. 5th floor. Believe it or not, the 5th floor, according to the state, is important. So please make sure you add 5th floor. Philadelphia, PA, 19103. The company phone number, 215-627-3500. Now we need a fax number. There's probably a few of you out there who's not even sure what a fax is. There are certain times, especially if you're dealing with a bank-owned property, they want to deal with faxes and not emails. It is important that our fax number be on the agreement of sale. Our fax number is 215-627-6525. 215-627-6525. Okay. Now, there are two little boxes. The question asked, and this is the representation of the broker. Is the broker a buyer agent so that the broker only represents the buyer? Or is the broker a dual agent in this transaction? Can somebody tell me the difference? Do you have any idea of what the difference may be? Hello? I know somebody's out.
Dual agents, they represent the buyer and the seller at the same time.
So, as a dual agent for the broker to represent both the buyer and the seller at the same time, would it be correct for me to say that this has to be an in-house transaction?
Yes.
Yes, right. So that means Keller Williams Philadelphia listed the property. If Keller Williams Philadelphia listed the property, the broker is representing the seller. It just so happens, though, a buyer agent from Keller Williams Philadelphia is writing an offer to that seller. So the broker is now representing both the buyer and the seller in the transaction. So you may want to put a little notation under dual agent in-house, meaning an in-house transaction forces the broker to represent both sides. Does everyone understand that? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Then there is another little tiny box, and that says transactional licensee broker and licensees provide real estate services but do not represent a buyer. Keller Williams Philadelphia does not practice transactional licensee. No, you cannot, as an agent working for Keller Williams Philadelphia, practice transactional licensee. So let's review. Can anybody tell me how many forms of representation there are in the state of Pennsylvania, so that if someone is involved in a real estate transaction, they will fall into one of how many categories? Let's go back and think about when you were in school. Let's go back and think about the consumer notice. How many forms of representation is there on the consumer notice? Okie dokie. I'm sorry?
2 forms?
There are 5 forms of representation anytime someone is entering into a real estate transaction in the state of Pennsylvania. Seller agency, buyer agency, dual agency, transaction agency, and designated agency. The transaction agency part we do not practice because that individual, that real estate agent, represents no one. It is considered a very high risk in E&O, and many large corporate companies, real estate companies, do not practice transactional licensee. Do not do it. Now, when you're filling out, though, a listing, you will accept, we can accept an offer from a transactional licensee. And that's oftentimes when you're splitting up and dividing the commissions, hopefully equally. You will identify that on a transactional licensee, you will often see 1%. 1% of the purchase price is often the accepted amount of commission given to someone who is involved in a transactional licensee part. We don't do it, but we will accept it if it comes in because we have the listing. Okay? All right, now we slide over to the right-hand side where it says licensee. Your name needs to go in there. Now, let's pretend you work on a team. Let's pretend you are part of a co-listing listing. Then both, either the team leader has to go on the top line, and you as part of the team would go on the second line. Or are you the listing agent on the top line and you have a co-lister with you on the second line? Okay, not hard, but let's try to be complete. License number. Your state license number needs to go in here. So if there is an individual on both these lines when it asks licensee's name, then we're going to need 2 license numbers. Direct phone number. There are very few licensees who have a direct landline, so often that line is not filled in. But for cell numbers, we absolutely need a cell number, right? How are we going to reach this person? If there are 2 individuals listing it, we need 2 cell numbers. And we are going to need an email, or maybe 2 emails. See the importance here of these things? So now we have 3 choices. How does this licensee represent this buyer? Are they a buyer agent so that the whole company represents the buyer? Or are they a buyer agent with designated agency so that only the licensee named above represents the buyer? Or is it a dual agency situation? So let me say this. We as a company, Keller Williams Philadelphia, practice designated agency. Now, with that statement made, would we ever check off the first box? Hello? As a buyer,
No, we don't.
as a buyer's agent, would we ever check off the first box?
No. Oh, on the left side or on the right side, you're looking?
On the right side, which is the licensee part.
On the right side, we checked only the second box.
We only check the second box. Okay, very good. And why do we only check it? Because we practice designated agency. Therefore, you will never check off the first box. No, no, no. Now, when might the third box be checked off?
if the listing agent also works for Keller Williams?
The third box would
You
be
represent the
checked.
buyer and the seller.
Correct. Because remember, what on the right-hand side of this rectangle are we speaking of? We're speaking of the licensee themselves. If the licensee is a dual agent, so that A, they had listed the property first and represented the seller and brought their own buyer in, that agent then would be a dual agent and would represent both the buyer and the seller in this particular transaction. Does that make sense? Okay. We move on. We have another long rectangle here. And it's the same thing. Seller representation with PA licensed broker. But there's that little box again that says no business relationship. Seller is not represented by a broker. What scenarios, what individuals might play a role that little checkbox gets checked off?
FSBOs.
FSBOs. For sale by owner. Slang FSBO. Right. So the FSBO, the guy who listed his own house, and he's quite fabulous, just ask him, doesn't need a realtor, and he's going to handle this all on his own. So that's going to get checked off. I don't need a realtor. I'm doing this by myself. Who else might be that fabulous that doesn't need a realtor to represent them in the sale, not the purchase, in the sale of their property?
The agent itself, the attorney.
An attorney.
An attorney, yep. And who else might be that fabulous?
Estate agent.
A real estate agent themselves. That is correct. Now, let's focus on the real estate agent. Our company has a policy that if, as a licensed PA agent, and your license is being hung with Keller Williams Philadelphia, it is strongly recommended for your E&O coverage that there are certain protocols that are needed before you can list your property. One is, it is strongly recommended that the real estate agent selling their own property, primary residence and or investment property, do a home inspection first before listing that property. That home inspection report should be made available to any potential buyer. Number two, you should be offering a 1-year home warranty with the transaction right from the very beginning. The moment it goes in the MLS, the notation under remarks is seller is offering a 1-year home warranty. Number three, you should not be the primary listing agent. I know some of you have control issues, and for that reason need to have your hand in the pot. So if that is your personality, go ahead and be a co-lister, but do not, under recommendations, be the listing agent. And you're like, but Vic, why? What is all this? Why? Because life's a funny thing. And many transactions end up in a court of law. Having those three variables on your side, A, you were not the primary listing agent. B, you did a home inspection and made it available to the potential buyers. And C, offering a home warranty gives another level of protection for you on your E&O insurance. It's good business. Okay? And that's what we have to do here. We have to do good business. Having the inspection done does not omit a buyer from having their own inspection done. But it is showing transparency. That's a really good word, transparency. Attorneys like that word. Transparency. That nothing is being missed. You're disclosing all. When you fill out that seller's property disclosure, never, ever leave a line unanswered. You will be under scrutiny. You as a professional are set at a higher standard than that of Joe Public because you're supposed to know better. You are licensed. It gets ugly in a court of law when you are representing yourself. So these are 3 precautionary measures we as a company highly encourage everybody to do when they're selling their own property, okay? Now, we look then at the larger rectangle. It's divided again in half, and it talks about who is the brokerage representing the seller. So it's either going to be us, or because you're a dual agent, remembering the buyer agent's filling this out, right? Or it's another company. So whomever the other company is, you're going to put in there. You're going to put in their license number. You got to look for it. Those of you who are listing properties, under agent remarks, please add our license number, so the brokerage license number, which is RB068858, in there so that other buyer agents can find it easily. And you can get the company address is now on Bright. Years ago, it was a lot harder to find, but it's on Bright and it's pretty easy to find. You need to put their phone number and their fax number. And now we have to determine, by looking at this, we have 2 options for the broker. Is the broker representing as a seller only, or is the broker a dual agent? So if it's an in-house transaction, then the broker is a dual agent. Otherwise, it's Coldwell Banker, Space and Company, Berkshire Hathaway. It will be seller agent. Broker represents the seller only, and you will be checking off that top box. Let's slide to the right, and we want to know who is the agent representing the seller. 1 or 2, depending on how it's identified in Bright, their license number, if they indicate a direct phone number, their cell number, and emails. Now, how does the seller agent represent the seller? Is it box 1, seller agent, all company licensees represent the seller? Or is it designated agent so that only the licensee named above represents the seller? Or is it a dual agency situation? So we know the dual agency situation would only happen if the agent represents both the buyer and the seller in this transaction. And now we are questioning box number 1 and box number 2. When in doubt, leave it blank. But I will say this. I can comfortably say large brokerages practiced designated agency. When in doubt, you can always check off designated agency. Even if you're wrong and it's a mom and pop who doesn't necessarily practice that, it's still not the end of the world. So if you have to pick something and it's 11 o'clock at night and you're got your hands wrapped around your face because you don't know what to do, check off designated agency. It will not be a deal breaker, believe me. The next, it has a reiteration of what is dual and or designated agency. And this is a reiteration for Joe Public. A broker is a dual agent when a broker represents both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. A licensee is a dual agent when the licensee represents the buyer and seller in the same transaction. All of brokers' licensees are also dual agents, unless, in capital letters, there are separated designated agents for buyer and seller. I just realized that's a misspelling. Wow, how about that? If the same licensee is designated for buyer and seller, the licensee is then a dual agent. By signing this agreement, buyer and seller each acknowledge having been previously informed of and consented to dual agency if it applies. Another reiteration, right? Now the buyer and seller are going to initial off on every page as we go through this. I want to show you something. Look at the very bottom right of this first page. Copyright, Pennsylvania Association of Realtors 2020. It is important when you're involved in any real estate transaction that you use the most recent accepted version of the agreement of sale. If you are a listing agent and you get an offer, and if you know this agreement well enough as you're skimming through looking, all of a sudden you're going to say to yourself, why does this agreement look a little different? Scroll back up to page 1 and look and see what version that buyer agent wrote the offer in. If the version is other than the most recent version, reject that offer. Have it rewritten on the most recent version. There are reasons for this because as we morph into different formats year after year, we want to be consistent. And we will not be consistent if we have to keep referencing back to see how the version was on whatever date that is. Reject the offer and mandate it has to be rewritten on the most recent verbiage that we are acceptable by date. Make sense? Okay. I had a very long conversation with an attorney last week. And there was a situation, we were in litigations, and the attorney said to me, who represents the E&O company for us, I don't understand. How did this happen? How is it that buyer agent in the walkthrough allowed their buyer to do X, Y, and Z? I don't want to go into details. And I said, because real estate agents don't know how to say the word no. I'm telling you, you guys must be the most horrific parents walking the face of the earth. And I say that tongue in cheek. Anybody here as a parent knows that the word no has to come out of your mouth. Being the real estate agent in the transaction, your job is the one to be in charge. Somebody has to be in charge here. That's your job. You're the professional. So when your buyer or seller wants to do something that is not right or is dangerous or fearful, you have to say no. When I said that to the attorney, he laughed and he said, oh my God, you're right. They are not, for whatever their reasons are, choose not to say no. I can't get that. That's GPAR on the phone calling me, but I'll get a hold of them later. Okay, let's move on to page 2. By this agreement date at the very top. Now, I can't begin to tell you how influential line 1 is and how so many times it is referred to incorrectly. Line 1 says, by this agreement date. What date do you type in there when you're writing an offer? Come on, work with me here. What date do we put in here? We're typing the offer.
Shouldn't it be the date that you're submitting the offer?
The date you are writing the offer. That's the date we put in here. That is very significant, that date. You will refer to that date frequently when you need to do addendums. Addendums will say at the very top, date of this agreement. You know how many times that's wrong? And you're like, how can it be wrong? It's right there. Line 1. How can that be wrong? Because buyer agents want to, in putting together addendums, put the execution date. No. It is the date that the agreement was offered or created, excuse me. The reason for that, there may be situations you might write 3 offers on the same property. That is the reference point of the one that we are speaking of the terms we've all agreed to. You wrote 3 offers on 123 Main Street, but it took the third one that took you 6 weeks to get to that everybody signed off on. That's the date that goes on here that we refer to on addendum, okay? So that's the purpose of that date. Next, it says purchase price and deposit. Purchase price is on line 4, and there's a dollar sign. I know I sound like really Vic, but why is there a dollar sign? What follows the dollar sign?
A number.
Yeah, how about that? The numerical number. Let's use for an example, 300,000. So the numerical number of 300, comma 000 goes in there. There is never a decimal point and 2 more. Agreement of sales never have cents. It's always whole numbers. So it would be 300,000 written numerically. Then we're going to type it out in words. 300,000. So we do it both numerically in numbers and in words of US dollars to be paid by buyer as follows. Number 1, initial deposit within blank days, 5 if not specified. Of when? Of the execution date. If not indicated in this agreement. Then the next line says additional deposit within blank days of the execution date. Now, so if we go back in time, let's go back 15 years. 15 years, it was customary in the city of Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, the state, that when a buyer was offering an agreement of sale, there was what it was called good faith money. And that was an offer, go that way. That was an offer of monies presented to the seller with the agreement of sale. It was a check that was cut, depending on the purchase price of the property, either averaged $500, $1,000, or maybe $5,000, depending again on the purchase price. And that was good faith. That was the buyer saying, listen, I really want this house. I'm presenting it to you with this check. Now that check just sat in purgatory, wasn't deposited anywhere, just kind of hung around until we got an execution. We didn't get an execution. It was voided out and returned to the buyer. And then 10 days later, which was a common number that went in on line 9, we did a second deposit because we're showing good faith, right? Now, let's fast forward to today, 2020. I speak of this because I am the one who has to deal with returning of deposit monies on a daily basis. I've been home at my dining room table for 6 weeks. My husband, who is retired, every day says to me, if I hear you talk about paragraph 26 one more time, I'm going to lose my mind. How is it realtors don't understand paragraph 26? Paragraph 26 speaks of how deposit monies are returned. Every day I have to deal with this. Every day I have to say, this is a problem. 13 times in the agreement of sale, it says, hey buyer, don't worry. All deposit monies will be returned to you according to the agreement of sale. It says that 13 times. So the buyer figures, well, what the hell? I'm always going to get my money back. No. Getting deposit monies back is quite difficult. It is not just as easy as that sentence says. Therefore, Vicki started a practice for her business. I still list, I still work buyers. So I'm in the trenches just like you every day. I'm not somebody in an ivory tower who hasn't done this in 25 years. I do it every day. I'm very, very cautious of my buyer's money due to this factor. Therefore, Vicki tries not to ever give up a deposit until we get through the home inspection. I've had very high success rate, greater than 85% of the time. I get away with doing that. Now, in the city of Philadelphia, I will tell you, if you have never dealt with agents in the suburbs, you're quite sure that they are aliens from another planet. God bless them. They cannot understand how we do business here. We are much more, in my humble opinion, advanced than agents in the suburbs. And I say that very respectfully. There were wonderful agents in the suburbs. But when it comes to deposit monies, it is becoming more and more acceptable. More and more often I see on an agreement of sale, everybody's put the brakes on. You're not getting any money from me until we get through this home inspection. As a buyer's agent, you can only protect your buyer for so long. And getting over that first big hurdle is what you are aiming to do with their deposit monies. Now, with that said, I then personally, I'm writing it. Go ahead, say that again.
I don't know who else, but can I ask you the question? Vicki, could you please at this point put some explanations on the situation when it's the seller's market and when the buyers are like fighting to get their offer to go through and they afraid to lose this house because they won't give the deposit money, or this situation is win or lose? What would you recommend to do?
And I understand your point. Here's the question, Mr. Buyer. You need to understand as the buyer's agent the consequences of them losing their money. Your responsibility is to explain this to them. You need for them to understand that that deposit money is at risk. Don't just think I'm getting it back. That's a mistake agents make. Don't worry. It says it 13 times in the agreement of sale. You're going to get your money back. Not that easy. After you have explained the risk to your buyer that this deposit money, I can't guarantee anything. And if they want the property that bad, absolutely, put your money down. Or are you fearful of your money and you don't want to do that? That has to be the decision of the buyer, but your job is to explain the risk. See, we're not explaining.
Thank you, Vicki.
Okay, so for Vicki, I move on to line 10. And in line 10, I put in there, within 3 days of all signing, change of term regarding inspection. And that just fits in there. 3 days after, all have signed, change of term regarding inspection. Once I have a signature on the change of term, we've banged out what we're doing in the home inspection, we're fixing, we're crediting, whatever the case may be. We've all done it and we've signed off. Woo! Got over that hot mess. Now, within 3 days, that's when I'm going to send over to the listing agent a deposit. Absolutely. Deposit monies need to go over. But my job is to protect it as long as I possibly can for my buyer from that not happening. I will tell you, in the city, you're seeing this more and more. In the suburbs, oh, mother of divine grace, they lose their mind. Now, depending on the savviness of the listing agent in the suburbs will determine how this paragraph goes. Was very lucky and sold a high-end new construction settled in February in Holland in Bucks County. New construction, very savvy listing agent, been in the business 35 years plus. That's how I wrote it, and he had no problems with it. On the flip of the coin, 10 months ago, I sold a very blue-collar house to a young couple, and that agent almost lost his mind and called me up and said, "But Vic, you didn't give me any deposit money." Now, this particular broker was a one-man band. He was the broker of record. He had no other agents, and he listed the property. I said to him, "Here's my mindset on this." And once I explained it to him, there was this moment of silence on the phone. And he said, "Wow, that's really a great idea. I never thought of it that way. Let me go to my my seller." He went to his seller, in full disclosure, was his son. And his son said, "No, I want money." So I offered $500. The agent went back to his son. The son said no. And we ended up putting $3,000 down. Reluctantly, my buyer agreed because they wanted the property. But I went into full disclosure of how this could possibly go to the nth of the earth. Worst scenario. They were willing to take that chance. And this was under a $200,000 property. And they put $3,000 down and everything went through lovely. God bless. But I will tell you, in the city, you have an 85% chance. If you choose to start doing your business that way to protect your buyers, you will be successful. In the burbs, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But that's how Vicki does her business. That doesn't mean you have to do it that way. I just want you to understand your options in protecting your buyer, okay? And then line 11, which I have to giggle, because line 11 says, remaining balance will be paid at settlement. Many, many years ago, there used to be a line there, and you would put the number of the balance that would have to come to settlement. Realtors cannot add and subtract. God bless us. They had to remove it because realtors couldn't figure out what number actually went in that space. So that no longer exists. It's just a sentence statement. We move on. Line 12. All funds paid by the buyer, including deposits, will be paid by check, cashier's check, or wired funds. All funds paid by the buyer within 30 days of settlement. That is huge. Please pay attention to that. Including funds paid at settlement will be by cashier's check or wired funds, but not by personal check. This happens over and over, primarily on cash transactions. It is extremely difficult to get a mortgage transaction completed and finalized and to closing 30 days or less. So that's why I say this happens generally on cash transactions. Please remember, 30 days or less. It's not Keller Williams rule. It's right in the agreement of sale. If you are settling 30 days or less, that check must be a certified bank check or wired funds. No personal checks, okay? Deposits, regardless of the form of payment, will be paid in US dollars to the broker for the seller unless otherwise stated here. Now there's a blank. What situation or whom might this fall into that it doesn't go to the seller? Because it says here, will be paid in US dollars to the broker for the seller. What situations might there be that there is no broker for the seller? Any ideas?
When the seller is an agent?
When the seller,
It's an
Title
agent
company.
or a lawyer?
when the seller is a FSBO,
Mm-hmm.
Title company.
okay, they're on their own, they're fabulous. Do we want to give them our buyers money? They're just a FSBO.
No.
It's gonna be the title. It could be title company or the attorney.
Very good. So it can go to a title company, yes. It can go to an attorney who would open up account and hold it, yep. And also, it could go to the broker for the buyer. So for instance, Vicki has a buyer who wants to purchase a FSBO. Remember, never have your buyer reach out to a FSBO. You have to go there first with a broker fee agreement. That form is a PAR form. That form says that Vicki has a ready, willing, and able buyer, Jack and Jill, who want to buy 123 Main Street. And that FSBO is going to pay Vicki to bring that buyer. And if the contract is consummated and we go to closing, Vicki will collect a commission, either from the FSBO or from the buyer. Now, like 90% of the time, the FSBO is more than happy to pay one side of a transaction, and that would be to a buyer agent. And you will be very successful, but you must approach the FSBO before your buyer does. Teach your buyer, never, ever, ever knock on a door. They have to reach out to you first. So with that said, I approached the FSBO, had the broker fee agreement signed. Vicki's getting a commission, but does not represent the FSBO, is only representing the buyer. In this agreement, on that line 16, I could put Keller Williams Philadelphia is going to hold the deposit monies. Does that make sense? Okay. Who will retain the deposit monies in an escrow account in conforming with the applicable laws and regulations until consummation or termination of this agreement? Only real estate brokers are required to hold deposits in accordance with the rules and regulations of the state real estate commissions. Checks tendered as deposit monies must be held uncashed pending the execution of this agreement. What does that last sentence mean? Checks tendered as deposit monies may be held uncashed pending the execution of this agreement. Does anybody have an idea what that last sentence could mean? Hello? Okay. If you are giving good faith money and with your offer is included a check from the buyer as good faith deposit, that check just stays in purgatory, in a limbo state. Nothing happens to that check until we have an executed agreement of sale, at which time will be deposited in an escrow account, depending on where, depends on how that line was filled out on C, line 15. But if there is no execution by all parties, that check void is written across it and is returned to the buyer agent. Okay? Seller's assist. This causes great confusion with people, and I'm not sure if it's the verbiage of the words seller assist, but let's try to go through this. Seller will pay, and it's a $ again, or blank percentage of the purchase price. First off, who can tell me what seller's assist is? Does anybody have a definition of what that means? No?
It's the money that seller agrees to pay. The percentage depends on what kind of loan the buyer is accepting, and the seller agrees to pay the part of the closing costs.
Exactly correct. Very good. So, seller's assist is just that. The seller is going to assist the buyer in closing cost only. That is the only thing the seller can do according to a loan institution. Now, write this down because there are variables. In an FHA transaction, the buyer can ask the seller up to 6% of the purchase price to go towards the buyer's closing cost. So let's do easy math. The property is listed at $100,000. The buyer offers $100,000, but is asking for 6% to come back to the buyer as seller's assist. How much is 6% of 100,000? Oh God, help me. Come on, guys. How much is it?
6,000.
Thank you. You go right to the head of the class. Thank you. So the seller is then making a determination if he's willing, and if he is, he's going to give that buyer $6,000 off of the top of his proceeds, of the cream of the crop, his net proceeds. He's willing to give $6,000 across the table to that seller. That's always negotiable, right? So we can talk about it. So in an FHA transaction, what's important for you to know is that the buyer can ask the seller to contribute up to 6%. All right, that's FHA. Now let's go conventional. What if this is a conventional transaction? If the buyer, write this down, is financing less than 10%, their financing, their loan to value ratio is less than 10%, they can ask the seller to contribute up to 3% of the purchase price. If in a conventional transaction, the buyer is putting 10% or greater down, then that buyer can ask the seller to contribute up to 6% of the purchase price. Again, these numbers are always negotiable going back. You're just learning what the max is. All right, now, with that said, let's go to VA. The VA can ask up to 4% of the purchase price. Also in a VA transaction, the seller can pay all of the closing costs. So you need a good loan officer to navigate that for you prior to you start typing, so you know what the heck you're typing. How about an investment property? What are the standards there? On an investment property, non-primary residence, the buyer can ask the seller to contribute up to 2% of the purchase price. All right, do you guys write that down somewhere? So you got this? Now, this is important stuff so that you are able to create an accurate agreement of sale. If I've said it once, I've said it 700 times. You guys have got to get buddy-buddy with a good loan officer. You've got to find somebody you have confidence in. You've got to work with somebody who's in your corner too to help you. So you guys really got to find good loan officers to make sure that if you're asking for seller's assist, you do this correctly. Now, let me ask a question. It was stated that it's only available, seller's assist can only be used for closing costs, and that's an accurate interpretation. How do you know how much the buyer's closing cost is going to be? How do you know? How do you know if you're,
You calculate them.
well, how do you calculate that? How do you calculate what the buyer's closing cost is going to be?
With the help of MLS?
No, that's not the correct answer.
With the help of loan officer.
That's
Mortgage
correct.
company.
You must rely on your loan officer. If this transaction is mortgaged, not cash, go ahead and use the MLS. We don't deal with a lot of cash, a percentage, but not a lot. Most of our transactions are financed. Your responsibility is to get the estimate of closing costs from the loan officer. That is important so that you can see other variables to help you fill out this agreement of sale correctly. If let's use our $100,000 illustration. The property purchase price is $100,000. It's FHA. You're asking the seller to pay 6%, which we know is $6,000. What if the estimate of closing cost is $5,500? But you're asking for $6,000. How does that work out? Can your buyer get $6,000?
No.
No. Ooh, very good. How come they can't get the $6,000? They can't get the $6,000 because that is going to exceed closing cost. Okay? So it's important you know what the closing cost is, so there's not these mistakes. How do you know what the closing cost is? You mandate from the loan officer that you get a copy of the estimate of closing costs that is required by RESPA laws for that loan officer to have sent that to your buyer. Okay? Is that making sense? We're all on the same page now. The loan officer, the buyer agent, and the buyer all have the same piece of paper. We all know what we're working with, right? Okay.
I have a quick question in terms of the seller assist.
Yep.
So say you are the seller of a house, or you're the seller's agent, and you guys and a buyer presents an offer. You guys agree on an offer, but then they come back and say they want a certain percentage of seller's assist, and your seller does not want to declines it essentially. Does that make the contract? So when they offer the seller's assist, does that void that original contract?
Okay. Did we ever sign anything the first time around?
So when we originally agreed to that original offer, yes.
So you had an executed agreement of sale with no seller's assist.
Hold on one sec. You're breaking up.
Okay. You had an executed agreement of sale with no seller's assist, correct?
Yes.
And let's say they went through the home inspection.
Yes.
And now they want a monetary credit for the repairs.
Right.
And in the addendum, they say, we now want 5% of seller's assist.
Right.
And your seller says, I don't think so.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, then we can't move any further, can we?
Right.
Everything has to be mutually agreed upon.
Right. Okay.
So the answer is no, I won't give you 5, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you 3.
Right. And if the seller says, I'm not giving you any, then, they either accept that or you move on.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Now, let me say this, though. Any monetary adjustment that a seller offers a buyer in regards to a home inspection, and this is a mortgage transaction,
Right.
The loan institution has to know about that. According to the loan institution, that's a seller's assist. So let's pretend. Let's pretend on our $100,000 property, it was agreed upon and signed off that the seller was going to give the buyer 3% or $3,000.
Right.
But after the home inspection, the buyer says, I need $4,000 for repairs.
Mm-hmm.
And the buyer and seller agree that $4,000 is fair. And the seller signs off on the 4. 4 and 3 equals how much if we add them together?
7.
7. But we know in an FHA transaction, 6% is our max. Now what do we got to do?
Renegotiate.
Yeah. So you have to be aware, and so does the loan institution,
Right,
because they're going to come
of
back
that
and say,
percentage.
wait a minute, kids, you're over the mark. You're over the high water mark. That $1,000 cannot go to that buyer from the seller. That's why it's so important that you pay attention to your numbers here and have a loan officer working with you so you guys work together to make sure you're not going to supersede. If you're going to get a monetary adjustment from a seller in reply to a home inspection, call your loan guy up and say, listen, they want to offer me X. Am I okay with that? With the seller assist I already have? Let's go over the math together.
Right, right.
Okay?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, very good. All righty. So now we go to settlement and possession. Settlement date is blank. You type it in. What's the settlement date? And then there are 2 little words right after that line, and it says, or before. Be very careful. As this is written, it kind of says that we can actually settle before that date. But there's a caveat. Everybody has to be made aware. If you are at a position where the buyer can buyer can settle sooner than the date indicated on line 26, do yourself a favor and fill out an addendum that has to be signed by all parties that the settlement date has been changed from X to Y. There are special forms that do that for you. So make sure everyone is in the loop by having everybody's signature that you are changing the settlement date. This reads that if it's before, you don't really have to do that. I'm telling you, you have to do it. Make it mandated. Buyer and seller have to agree to that. So that's where we get the signatures, right? Settlement will occur in a county where the property is located or in an adjacent county during normal business hours unless buyer and seller agree otherwise. Okay, so let's pretend this is a Philadelphia County property. What counties are adjacent to Philadelphia?
Bucks County.
Yep.
Suburbs, right?
Montgomery County, what else?
Delaware County.
The Chester.
Bucks County.
Yes, Chester. So Delaware, Bucks, Montgomery. Who did I forget? Chester. Chester, Delaware, Bucks, Montgomery. Any one of those are adjacent and it's not a problem. What if it's in Lycoming County? You helped your cousin, who's an avid hunter, buy a small cabin up in the woods in Lycoming County. Where are we settling this property at? What's it say on line 27?
Can you repeat your question?
Yes. If I can repeat the question. You represent the buyer. Your buyer bought a small cabin in Lycoming County. Where is the settlement going to be?
It's going to be
Near the counties that we just mentioned, unless otherwise
agreed upon in
So what county is that?
in one of the 5 counties surrounding Philadelphia.
No.
Oh, where the property is located, right, of course.
Right. Clearly says settlement will occur in the county where the property is located. So this cabin that we're going to settle on, we have to go to Lycoming County. Lycoming County is not adjacent to Philadelphia County. You guys get this now?
Yeah, I have a settlement was done in here in Dresher in Upper Dublin, but
Yes.
the property we bought was in Poconos. I forgot.
And that was mutually agreed upon.
It was mutually agreed.
Right. Otherwise, just know that the buyer is responsible to be at the county where that property is for closing. All right? Because it says right there on line 28, buyer and seller agree otherwise. Oh, we've agreed otherwise, that we were going to settle in another county. At the time of the settlement, the following will be prorated on a daily basis between the buyer and the seller, reimbursing where it applies: current taxes, rent. If you happen to have this in paper form, you need to put a circle around the word rent. We're going to come back to that. That is huge. Interest on mortgage assumptions, condominium fees, homeowner association fees, water and or sewage fees, together with any lienable municipal service fees. In the city of Philadelphia, what 2 municipal services are lienable?
And electric.
Does anybody know?
Sewer and electric.
Water
Water and gas.
And gas.
and gas. Thank you very much. Water and gas are lienable. That is why on a title report, they're noted if they're in the rear. So it says here, together with any lienable municipal and service fees. So if there is a balance that needs to be paid, it has to be paid at the table to make everybody even Steven. All charges will be prorated for the period covered. Seller will pay up to and including the date of settlement, and buyer will pay all days following settlement unless otherwise stated here. Underline that sentence, because you're going to get a seller who's quite fabulous, who is arguing with you at the settlement table on the proration that he has to pay the day of closing on prorations. Unless you know where the heck that is, you're fumbling around at the table. Remember, the seller pays up to and including the closing date for prorations. Now, 2 things. This whole proration thing is over your pay grade. Don't do it. Don't even get near it. All of that proration is handled by the title company, who do that on a daily basis and are good at it. You're not good at it, and you're going to screw it up. So stay the hell away from it. When I told you to circle that word rent, that is imperative. If you have a listing that is tenant occupied, the title company must get a copy of all those leases. The title company must know what securities are being held so that they can prorate them properly and transfer them over from the seller's proceed to the buyer. Your title company has no idea if a property has tenants in it. Therefore, over and over and over again, this is missed, and 20 minutes to 2 hours after the closing, the buyer of that property that now has inherited that tenant calls you on the phone and says, you know, I didn't get a check for that security deposit. And your stomach just landed in your bladder because you realize you screwed up. Many, many buyer agents have lost commissions paying that buyer the security deposit that was never sent over to that buyer at closing. Go ahead, try to get it from the seller post-closing. Good luck with that.
So is it our job to make sure that the title company gets that security deposit from the seller?
What did I say? You're not listening again. What I said was the buyer agent's responsibility, if you are in a transaction that has leases, you need to make sure those leases get to the title company. It's not the seller's job. It's not the seller's agent's job. It's you, the buyer agent's job. You as a buyer agent, and as we go down here, we're going to talk about the top form, which is the Tenant Occupied Property Addendum. That form has to be made part of the agreement of sale if the purchase is of a property that is tenant occupied. Your buyer has to be able to preview those leases within 5 days of the execution of this agreement. So you're going to have a copy of those leases. When you order title, you have to make sure that title company has a copy of the leases.
Thanks, that was really helpful. I'm actually making an offer for a buyer for a rental property, so.
Very good.
Important.
Okay. So when this starts affecting your commissions, that's when everybody starts paying attention. And it will. So let's pay attention. It goes on to say, go ahead.
I'm sorry, and that applies to last month, and it doesn't matter what agreement the seller has with their tenants. Like, let's say if they didn't pay rent to him, the seller is still responsible to pay that deposit to the buyer.
It all depends on how the lease was structured. You have to read the lease.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh. So let's go to D. For the purpose of prorating real estate taxes, the periods covered are as follows. Municipal tax bill in all county and municipalities in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is a state, are for the periods of January the 1st to December the 31st. So our tax bills throughout the entire state of Pennsylvania are based on January the 1st to December the 31st, our real estate taxes. Then it says, school tax bills for Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Scranton school districts are from the period of January the 1st to December the 31st. So they're based on the exact same time frame as the real estate taxes, but only for 3 cities. School tax bills for all other school districts are from a period of July the 1st to June the 30th. So every other school district in the entire state of Pennsylvania, except for Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Scranton, there are 2 separate bills that go out to the homeowner. One for the real estate tax, January the 1st to December the 31st, or the tax bill that's going, the school tax bill that'll happen in July the 1st to June the 30th. So for those people other than living in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Scranton, get 2 tax bills a year, one for school and one for real estate. Does that make sense? This is above your pay grade. You cannot do math. Do not try to figure out the prorations. That is going to be handled by the title company. Stay away from that because you're going to do it wrong. So don't even get near it. Conveyancing from seller will be by fee simple deed or special warrant deed unless otherwise stated here. That is how the coverage of the title insurance is by fee simple deed and special warrant deed. That's how we're going to convey title unless otherwise stated, which again is above your pay grade. Payment of transfer tax will be divided equally between the buyer and seller unless otherwise stated.
Everything is paused by me. Any idea why?
Is anyone else frozen? Because I can't see Vicki.
Oh, yeah, it was frozen.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be Vicki's internet.
Hello? Is anybody here?
Yes. I guess you're the host now.
I'm going to call Vicki, guys. I think she lost internet. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Vicki, you're back.
Sorry, guys, I don't know what happened. I lost electricity to my house. Oh, boy. And I, honest to God, paid the bill. Honest to God.
There's a large storm brewing, so.
All right, so this is important, that the property is to be broom clean of day and time of settlement. This is a real problem, and it's a difficult problem. Even though it says it here that the property is to be free of debris and broom swept clean, if you are dealing with an estate or a property that was started to rehab and they didn't finish it and everything's a nightmare and stuff's all over the place, on the last page of the agreement of sale, you will probably want to reiterate that the property is to be empty, free of all personal property and debris. Because when you go to do that walkthrough and the house is still filled with stuff, it's a big problem. It's above your pay grade, and you need to reach out to somebody with experience and figure out, how am I doing this? Because I got a big problem. The house is still filled with stuff. First phone call you make is with the listing agent, because we got a problem here. Okay. If seller has identified in writing that the property is subject to a lease, possession is to be delivered by deed, existing keys, and assignment of existing leases to the property, together with security deposits and interest. Oh, didn't we just talk about that? Underline that. Together with security deposits and interest. I'm going to give you an example. A couple years ago, an agent said to me, Vic, can you please help me? I've got a problem and we're settling tomorrow. I said, okay, what's the problem? It was a multi-use property in West Philadelphia. The seller is a licensed real estate agent, a very mature woman who says to my agent, the buyer agent, oh, by the way, I can't give your buyer the security deposits because some of my tenants didn't pay last month's rent. So I'm going to use their security deposits. And my buyer agent, smart lady, says to me, Vic, that's not right. And I said, you're right. That's not right. So I said, by the way, I will be at your closing. So I go to the closing, and the seller, the mature real estate agent, is tardy, and she shows up late. And I kept a seat next to me, and I asked her, Phyllis, come sit next to me. And so Phyllis said, okay. And she come and sat next to Vicki. And I introduced who I was, and I said, Phyllis, I've got a situation. And she's like, what's the matter? I said, the buyer agent tells me that you're not going to give up the security deposits to the new owner. Ah, that's right, she said. I can't. Shoves her shoulders. I can't. because some of these tenants didn't pay last month's rent, and I need that money for last month's rent. I said, oh, but Phyllis, and I had a copy of the agreement of sale in front of me. I pointed to line 47, and it says existing keys and assignments of existing leases for the property, together with security deposits and interest. And she looked at me. I said, Phyllis, is that your initial on the bottom of page 2? And she said, yeah. And I turned to page 14 and I said, Phyllis, is that your signature on page 14? She said, yeah. I said, Phyllis, apparently you agreed to turn over all the security deposits with interest when you executed this agreement of sale. Am I right? She said, yeah. So what happened was, it just so happened that the security deposit was at a bank very close to 1619 Walnut. And everybody got up and went across to that bank and had the security deposits removed in a certified bank check made out to the buyers. You need to know where this information is, because someday you're going to be me sitting next to your seller asking why it is that those deposit monies and interests are not going to your buyer's agent. Okay? So it's important you know where all these little verbiages are. If any, a day and time of settlement. Seller will not enter into a new lease or extend existing leases for the property without the written consent of the buyer. Buyer will acknowledge existing leases by initialing the leases when? At the execution of this agreement. When you're writing an offer for a property that has leases, do yourself a favor. Reach out to that listing agent ahead of time. Let them know I'm bringing you an offer and I need a copy of those leases, unless otherwise stated in the agreement. Now, right there on line 51 is a little tiny box. If you're writing an offer for a property that has tenants in it, you check off that box. Tenant occupied property addendum, known as a top form. That must be included in the agreement of sale. Therefore, if you guys turn to page 14, which is the last page of the agreement of sale, you will note that there are options for special clauses. So line 769 will be checked off, and you will put top, TOP form, is to be made part of the agreement of sale. You need to indicate to everybody this whole agreement of sale is in its whole, including the top form, okay? Date and time of the essence. This is very important. People have lost lots of money because they screw up on dates. Written acceptance of all parties will be on or before blank date. That's very, very important, that date. That is the last day at 11:59 that everyone can agree to the terms of this contract. That doesn't mean we can't take extensions, but without an extension, everything is hinged on that date. The settlement date and all other dates and times identified for the performance of any obligation of this agreement are of the essence and are binding. Underline those words. Are of the essence and are binding. You will get yourself in some serious hot water if you screw up dates. The execution. Now, paragraph C. Nobody can figure this out. I'm telling you ahead of time, we're going to use our fingers. The 10 fingers God gave us couldn't be more valuable than to figure out timing on the agreement of sale. The execution date of this agreement is the date when buyers and sellers have indicated full acceptance of the agreement by signing and or initialing it. For the purpose of this agreement, the numbers of days will be counted from when? from the execution date, excluding the day this agreement was executed, and including the last day of the time periods. All changes to this agreement shall be initialed and dated. So, let's see how smart my class is. I'm going to give you a scenario. You write the offer on January the 3rd. January the 4th, the agreement is executed by all parties. What is the last day, if we're working on a 10-day reply to home inspection, what is the last day you as the buyer and buyer's agent can turn in your wish list to the seller?
The 14th.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
January 14th.
The 14th. How did you come up with the 14th?
January 5th. The execution day is January 4th.
Yes.
So January 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th. My 10 fingers.
Good for you. And she's 100% right. So our execution date was the 4th. We don't count that date. We go to the next one. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. January the 14th at 11:59 is the last moment you can send over to the seller's agent the reply to home inspection and still be in compliance.
These 2 more days for negotiation.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the first 10 days.
So
I'm trying to get it right.
So we can't submit a reply to inspection after the 10th date.
That's correct. If that's how it was chosen and determined in the inspection contingency. It's 10 days unless otherwise stated. The entire inspection contingency is based off of 17 days. But each group of days, the 10, 5, and 2, are always based at the end of the contingency period. That is a whole nother class that we will be talking about. So just for argument's sake, you need to know your numbers to know what is the last day I am required by the contract to turn things in. So you just need to understand how to count. You don't count the 4th in our illustration because that was our execution date. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
So I sold a property early this year and the buyer turned in their reply to inspections on the 12th date.
They were out of contract.
The contract was 10 days.
They were out of contract.
So what happens to their deposit?
Well, I don't know. What happened to the contract?
I mean, we still accepted it.
Well, there you go. So your actions, your seller's actions were non-compliant. You didn't do anything about it. But your seller very well could have said, oh no, honey, oh no, you are out of contract. And when we go over inspections, that's when you learn if a buyer doesn't get themselves out, they just bought that hook, line, and sinker with all the bumps and bruises.
Okay, so they're at risk of losing their deposit if they don't reply within what the contract says.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, got it.
I can't emphasize enough of you people getting your numbers right. So important. And agents screw it up all the time. I don't know why we can't do math. All right, let's move on. The settlement date is not extended by any other provision of this agreement and may only be extended by mutual written agreement by all parties. For whatever reason, if any time frame needs to be extended, even though we're texting, even though we're emailing, even though we're talking about it, only is correct if it is done by an addendum where everyone has signed off. Just talking about extending, just texting about extending, no. None of that works. You have to have it in writing that there is going to be an extension of time different to that than was agreed upon in the agreement of sale. Okay?
What if one party doesn't sign? Let's say sellers are prolonging the closing, and the buyer sends them the extension, but the buyer signs it, but seller doesn't.
Then you don't get it.
Okay.
Now what are you going to do?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So you have to find out, why is the seller not doing this? And the listing agent's like, I don't know. I try calling him. He doesn't answer. I text him. He doesn't reply. I email him. I don't know what the hell's the matter. The guy went underground. I don't know what to do. If you're representing that buyer, you send a termination over immediately. You get your buyer out of that contract. If you do not get your buyer out of this contract, those terms that were initially agreed upon become then the responsibility of the buyer, and they buy the property in its as-is condition. Even if you get them out, you send a termination over. Let's pretend. At 11 o'clock on the last minute of the last day, you have to negotiate the inspection, and you decide, you people just are not playing with me. You're not responding to me. You send over at 11 o'clock at night a termination from your buyer, getting them out of this contract. Then you're out of the contract with or without the signature of the seller. If you chose not to do that and the clock strikes midnight and now you're tardy, guess what? Your buyer just bought that house with every bump and bruise it has. You've got to be vigilant in getting your buyers out of these contracts. Now, everybody goes into a panic. What? Oh no, what'd you just do? Or what did I just do? Your seller isn't playing, and I'm not playing with him. Until your seller is ready to play, then come back to me, of which time you will enter in a totally new agreement of sale. Okay? Because you got out of the first one. You sent that termination and return of deposit monies due to the lack of response from that seller. You're out. Your buyer is not going to be responsible for all those bumps and bruises because he's not playing. And he figures, if I don't play, we'll just move along. No. Okay? Listen, guys, all of this comes with experience. And clearly, nobody here watching my video has experience enough to understand these bumps and bruises. This is when something feels screwy. This is when the hair on the back of your neck stands up and your stomach does a flip and you're like, wait a minute, this is wrong. I can tell something is wrong here. Pick up the damn telephone and call somebody with experience and say, Vic, whoever, Mike Rosanio, if you guys, or Will, if you guys belong to Pro Coaching, which is huge, who have experience and know what to do, get them on the line and say, something's wrong here. What? Help me. What am I supposed to do? Because you are going to be responsible for these mistakes. You're the one whose name is on that lawsuit when we all get written up because there's a lawsuit. And yes, I am trying to put the fear of God in you because everybody gets named in a lawsuit. So these dates are really important. Now, last paragraph. Certain terms and time periods are pre-printed in this agreement as a convenience to the buyer and the seller. All pre-printed terms and time periods are negotiable and may be changed by striking out the pre-printed text and inserting a different terms acceptable to all parties except where restricted by law. Where might it be restricted by law to make changes? And since I know you're not going to know, it's going to be under the Condominium Act, the 3407s and the 5407s, which we will talk about later. All right, let's turn to page 3, zoning. Failure of this agreement to contain the zoning classifications, except in cases where the property and each parcel thereof, if subdividable, is zoned solely and primarily to permit, oh, I can't even talk, single-family dwellings, will render this agreement voidable at buyer's option, and if voided, all deposit monies will be returned to the buyer. Oh yeah, there you go. Here's one of those 13, all deposit monies will be returned. Now, unless this property is something other than single family, it's important that the zoning classification be added here. Listen to me, guys. A huge lawsuit when you are selling property that is not zoned properly, because it looks like a duplex, has 2 kitchens, 2 bathrooms on 2 different floors. It walks like a duplex. Well, I have separate entrance. You go downstairs in the basement and there's 2 heaters, 2 water heaters, 2 meters for electric, 2 meters for gas. Jesus, everything's separate. This has got to be a duplex, right? No. More times than not, realtors sell property that are improperly zoned. It is of legal use being used as a duplex. You, the buyer's agent and the buyer, must, and I put that in capital letters and I said it really loud, must determine what the zoning of this property is to make sure your buyer is purchasing something of legal use. A buyer may purchase something of illegal use, but they got to know about it and know the consequences thereof. But you don't know enough to know you don't even know. So you must make sure that if you are selling and representing a buyer who is purchasing something other than a single-family home, you get that right. It's going to fall on your head. You're the one. Okay? Now, fixtures, personal properties. Let's go over this. A is new for 2020 agreement of sale. Please note, on line 71, where it says fixtures and personal property, see where it says 1-20 in parentheses? That's telling you the date that this was added to the agreement of sale. And now we all know, oh, this is new. It was added January of 20. It's the new version. Let's read what it says. It is possible for certain items of personal property to be so integrated into the property that they become a fixture and will be regarded as part of the property and therefore included in the sale. Buyer and seller agree, buyer and seller are encouraged to be specific when negotiating what items will be included or excluded in the sale. They're reiterating to everybody, let's pay attention what's coming with the house and what's not coming with the house. Included in the sale, unless otherwise stated, are all existing items permanently installed on the property, free of liens, and other items included, which are known as plumbing, heating, gas fireplace logs, radiator covers, hardware security systems, and thermostats. Those fancy thermostats were never pre-printed in here from those high-end, high-efficiency heating systems, and now it's made part of. That seller can't walk away with that $1,000 thermostat. Lighting fixtures, including chandeliers and ceiling fans. Please stop writing in ceiling fans. It's already here. Pool, spa, and hot tub, including the covers and the cleaning equipment. Electric animal fencing systems, excluding the collar. Garage door openers and transmitters. When you do your walkthroughs and this property has a garage and a garage door opener, make sure the transmitters are there. Mounting brackets and hardware for televisions. We have a 65-inch flat screen TV. Yep, the seller can take the TV. No, the seller cannot take the brackets. They have been made a part of the property now. And sound equipment, unpotted shrubbery. Can anybody tell me what unpotted shrubbery, plants, and trees are?
Something that grows in the ground?
Perfect. The Japanese maple on the front lawn on this beautifully manicured, professionally landscaped property cannot be dug up. It's in the ground. Smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, sump pump, storage shed, fences, mailbox, wall-to-wall carpeting, existing window screens, storm windows and screen storm doors, window covering hardware, including the rod and bracket. That's really important. The seller can take their curtains. What they cannot take is the rods and the brackets. They must remain with the property. You who list properties, make sure your sellers understand they have to leave the rods and the brackets. Shades and blinds, awnings, central vac systems with the attachments, built-in air conditioners, built-in appliances, the range oven, dishwasher, trash compactors, any remaining heating and cooking fuel stored on the property at time of settlement. This actually happened to me. I can't even make this stuff up. A seller had the oil in the tank removed from the tank 2 days prior to settlement. So when the buyer's agent went to do the walkthrough, the house was ice cold and wouldn't kick on. Why wouldn't it kick on? Because the heating system had a safety, and the safety is once the tank gets below X gallons of heating fuel, it won't kick on. I had to pay to have 50 gallons of oil dropped in that tank to get it to kick on and be reprimed so that we could get to the table. Sellers are amazing people. They must leave the fuel. Your job is to tell them, you cannot remove the fuel in this tank before closing. If owned, solar, panels, windmills, water treatment systems, propane tanks, and satellite dishes, unless otherwise stated, the following items are to be included in the sale at no additional cost. Now, what 3 items are added on line 85 routinely and customary? So you're writing this offer for your buyer. What 3 items might you ask for to be included in the sale of this property?
Usually the refrigerator, the oven, and what else? The dishwasher.
Okay, so did you not listen to anything I said? The range was mentioned. The dishwasher was mentioned. They're built in. Already talked about that. What 3 items are often added in this spot to be included? What 3 appliances? Let me change the verbiage. What 3 appliances are added, and it is customary to see that in the agreement of sale? Washer, dryer, and what else?
Fridge.
Yep. Washer, dryer, and refrigerator are customarily added and acceptable to a mortgage lender, if any, to go along with the house. Does anybody here from school remember the term chattel? Who could tell me what a chattel is? That's a real estate word.
Is it a movable object?
It's personal property that is not affixed to the building. So if we unplug the refrigerator and it's on a roller, it's just going to roll out into the kitchen. If we unplug the washing machine and the dryer, they just move away, right? They are personal property. So you want to add them. Please do not forget to do that. Another example where buyer agents lose their commission because they forgot to add it. And they said, oh, but it was in the seller's property disclosure. That's not a contract, is it? If you don't add it to the agreement of sale, it doesn't count. Therefore, you better make sure you add washer, dryer, and refrigerator, or your commission is buying washer and dryer and refrigerator for your buyer. The following items are not owned by the seller and may be subject to lease or other financial agreement. Contact the providing vendor for more information for such as solar panels and windmills, water treatment systems, propane tanks, and satellite dishes. Exclusions. What might be something that a seller says, I am not selling this, whatever this is, with the house? What might that be?
A chandelier.
Perfect. Even though the chandelier is pre-written in here, you are now going to exempt that because that hideous chandelier was a gift from Aunt Lucy when they got married 35 years ago. And that seller wants that chandelier. You should include that as an exemption, but I would recommend it coming down before the buyer ever sees it and something tastefully replaced. But a chandelier is customary. Often refrigerators are exempted. There are some really high-end refrigerators that are extremely costly. And the seller makes a business decision, they're taking that. Please make sure that is indicated everywhere in bright that that is an exemption. You must read your agreement of sale closely when you're a seller's agent, not to miss these little things that some agents try to sneak through. So a refrigerator, the washer dryer, the chandelier, all these types of things. An outside spa, I have seen that to be exempted. It is freestanding. Seller says, I'm taking the spa with me. Make sure that is documented. Okay, am I making sense here? All right, we're done for today. We will start next week on mortgages, paragraph 8. I certainly hope you guys learned something today. I don't mean to be mean, but people don't get it. And they lose thousands of dollars of commission. They are entered into lawsuits. And they have to pay for the attorney on their E&O. And they have $2,500 fee they got to pay every time you guys go to court. I'm telling you people, pay attention. Save your money.
Question about personal property.
Yes.
So, in the scenarios of, let's say, a developer rehabbing a property halfway, and then he left all his tools inside the property, and he wants to sell everything as is, do we have to write all the stuff that was left behind, even though it was like, it looks pretty chaotic inside and you can't really tell what from what?
Okay. So I would notify the listing agent and say to him, please have the seller remove all of his personal items. It's not uncommon that in a rehab where the developer threw his hands up and said, that's it, I'm done, to find sheets and sheets of drywall, to find a stainless steel sink that was supposed to be installed, to find spackling, buckets of spackling. That's not uncommon, and he's willing to give it up. If he's not thinking straight, and when people are in that kind of dire straits, they're not thinking straight. and his circular saws and his air guns and all this kind of stuff is valuable to him because he needs to gather that all back up and move on with his life. Be a nice person and reach out to that listing agent and say, listen, is your dude going to take his personal equipment or what's dealio here?
So what about in the case that the buyer wants everything that's left behind with the property?
Then I would indicate under inclusions, all personal property, tools, levels, hammers, like go right down the list.
So basically I have to list every single thing
Yes.
that's left behind.
Yes. If that's what they wanted, yes.
So I have to, is there a chance for me to go back inside the property and take a second look at what's left? And because usually just look at the property one time and then submit an offer, but that's not enough for me to list each thing that was left behind.
So under the rules of the state of Pennsylvania, can you go back in there?
Only for an inspection.
I don't know. When was the offer written?
Well, this is like hypothetical because I did come across this kind of.
Yeah, I know this is all pretend. So I already know that we're in violation. So if you entered into an agreement of sale after March the 18th, you can't do diddly squat, and you've already done diddly squat. Agents, I would certainly hope you read the updated guidelines from the state that we blasted out to everybody. And here is paragraphs that have been added. And it says in here, please note, a failure to follow the guidance issued by the Department of State can result in disciplinary actions.
Oh, this was like a property months ago. Like,
you entered into an agreement of sale months ago?
It's not, we didn't submit an offer, but I'm just saying, like, if we were to submit an offer for that property, would I have to go down each item on the list?
You're going to have to find out what is to be included. You can't go back in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry. So the first time we go in, while the the buyer's checking out the property, I have to note down everything that was on the property, basically.
If you're going to ask for it, how else can you identify what to ask for?
Okay. I'm just making sure.
It's common sense. We have to talk through it. You have to abide by, because there is going to be lawsuits coming out of this COVID-19 without a doubt.
Oh, I'm not taking anyone to look at properties now.
That's good.
Months ago.
I know.
Sorry for the confusion.
That's okay. Months ago is fine. It's just you can't get back in. Now, for all we know, that owner already went back and took all the stuff out. How do you know he didn't do it?
I mean, it's already sold to someone else, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. But in this scenario, he very well could have gone back and removed all that.
Right, exactly. That's why I wanted to know, like, how do we prevent them from going back to take everything, so that I want to make it clear on the agreement that everything has to be left behind and has to be bought with the property.
You have to itemize everything.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Right? Now, before that seller signs that, he reads it. You gave him 3 days to sign it. He's like, holy mackerel. I'm not leaving my drills and my saws. Runs back day 2 and cleans everything out. You've got to understand the nature of the human being.
Okay, so just make sure with the seller's agent that the seller wants actually to leave all his tools behind before making that list, basically.
Yeah. And even then, you got to make the list. You have nothing to reference back to. And the list has to be made part of the agreement of sale.
Okay. All right.
Right? Okay, guys. Any
Is
other
it possible
questions?
one question? Yeah, one more question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
What could be the scenario if the buyers that are putting an offer with the deposit down and something goes wrong, but they did everything right? How can they lose that deposit? Because sometimes buyers will ask me, like, what can happen for me to lose the deposit?
Well, right now we're dealing with COVID-19 in that about 2 weeks into COVID-19, mortgage companies changed their guidelines dramatically. There are some buyers who now don't qualify because of the guideline change. No fault of theirs, right? I did qualify. Now they changed the guidelines. Now I don't qualify. Seller says, I don't really care. Without mutual acceptable or written agreement signed by all parties to determine where the deposit money goes, doesn't go anywhere. That's where paragraph 26 comes into play. You have to know and understand and digest paragraph 26. There is no guarantee to anybody's deposit money. There is no guarantee. That's why Vicki is so selfish giving it up, because there is no guarantee. You can't guarantee anything to your buyer that they're getting that money back.
So basically, I just tell them I cannot guarantee that you can get your money back. But if they ask me why, what can possibly go wrong if we comply with everything?
The seller hasn't signed off. That's what went wrong. The seller said, I don't care.
Okay.
Seller has to agree. If the seller doesn't agree, the money will not leave the account. It can go to court, and the court can decide who gets the money. But nope, the brokerage will not release that money. Escrow laws are extremely rigid. Nope, 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 nope. No guarantee to anything. We don't come with guarantees, unfortunately. That's why it is so important that you pay attention to so many things. And dates is a huge deficiency with agents. Okay? All right, we'll talk about mortgages next week. Bye.
Thanks, Vicki.